Welcome to the Charlottesville City Council Candidate Forum. I'm Neil Williamson. I'm the president of the Free Enterprise Forum, and I'm joined in moderating this event with Sean Tubbs, the president of Town Crier Productions. Sean and I have worked together way too long, back to 2005, I think, on many of these candidate forums. I want to thank the candidates for joining us live and in person here at the Hillsdale Conference Center. I want to thank the Hillsdale Conference Center for providing the space and the technology for this event. And I also want to thank tonight's Zoom technical director, Abby Tammon, who is charged with the challenge of making Sean and I look good. A goal of tonight's conversation is to be a little bit more casual and free-flowing in the conversation. Sean or I will ask a question of candidate one. Candidate two, that candidate will respond. Candidate two will be then asked to address the same question and perhaps call out any differences or similarities between their policies. And the same will happen with candidate three. The candidates' order will be rotated throughout the event. I will be conducting time, and I have this fancy sign that says 1 minute left. So when I hold up that sign, there's 1 minute left. The last third of the forum will focus on the candidates posing questions to each other as a group. With all of that housekeeping out of the way, Mr. Tubbs has the first question for Yas Washington.
Thank you, Neil. Yas Washington, the first question goes to you, and we'll just get started. The Charlottesville Planning Commission is hoping that the current council will vote on the comprehensive plan by the end of this year, including a future land use map that calls for increased residential density across the city. If you're elected, you're going to be one of the people who are called upon to implement the plan by making changes to the zoning code. Do you support the general vision of the future land use map? And what is your vision for translating that into a new ordinance? How will you respond if a group of current residents are organized in opposition to new residents as proposed in that future land use map? And one last question, lots of questions here, but how important are the desires of individual property owners in the future of the land they own? And how do potential new residents factor into this whole equation?
As we look to address development and what that looks like in Charlottesville with our growing population, I definitely want to make sure that we're not only considering affordability, but we're moving forward on it with residential development. So with that being said, the comprehensive plan definitely supports that with a dedication of $10 million, which I think is absolutely amazing. I think that we should continue to work alongside TJAC, Piedmont Housing Alliance, AHIP, and a few others as well. Those are our partners in regards to housing. As we work to solve the war on poverty, we need to also make sure that we're not leaving out our 30 to 50% area income individuals as well. So it's very important to, or AMI, my apologies. But I definitely want to make sure that our low to moderate families are acknowledged and that there's definitely housing supply that accommodates their pressing needs. With that being said, in regards to the land use map, I think it's important for us to make sure that we're still considering R1 zoning, making sure that we have single family homes. Also as well, aside from that, making sure that we're still talking about density. While we continue to build, we want to make sure that we don't have condos or apartments that are only geared towards individuals who are upper class individuals or single family or single tenants. So aside from that, I definitely think that it would be important for us to make sure that we're utilizing the funding received to the comprehensive plan, making sure that we're considering purchasing things like Kim's Market and definitely using existing buildings that are abandoned so that we can utilize that to the best of our ability to build it up so that it can be a residential development, and it'll definitely speed up the process in regards to bringing that to fruition. And we can see a quick turnover. And then aside from that, in regards to, existing owners, making sure that we're doing something called gradation. I definitely think it's important to make sure that we're building up our city to the fullest ability. making sure that we're utilizing the structure, which is something that Habitat for Humanity already does. But I definitely think it's important for us to continue those initiatives. And that's basically what I have in regards to that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pinkston, I'll rephrase the question to you. We won't have to go over that whole mouthful.
Yeah, because that's a long question.
It is.
Good job, yeah.
Good job.
But the bottom line is that the current council will is expected to potentially adopt a future land use map and the comprehensive plan by the end of the year. If you're elected, you will have to help implement that. What's your general sense of the current vision and some of the and touching on the idea of some of the ideas between what's the balance between current residents and new residents, existing property owners versus future?
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having us here. This is a question designed to, or that could, equally offend everyone across the board in equal measure, which I think means that we're making some progress. When you've got people in the community really asking hard questions, really trying to engage about, okay, what does it mean to live in Charlottesville? What does it mean? What do we want our city to be like? And as I've followed this debate somewhat on Twitter and then some of the other things, the various groups that have come up to say one thing or other about the topic, it has been concerning to me, and I think you're seeing this replaying throughout the country, this sort of division between people who feel like what they have is being jeopardized and others who feel like they don't have opportunity. And I want to be about opportunity. And so I am for greater density as a general concept in terms of increasing housing stock. I do think we can do that while addressing our racist zoning laws in the past, like R1 zoning. I think we can get to a future in which we have more options for housing and more density while still being thoughtful about existing neighborhoods, existing communities when we get into the zoning rewrite. So I think as I looked at how the plan has evolved from when I first saw it in May until now, clearly back in May, homeowners were really upset. And now the plan that I saw in August, you had others that felt like that the changes had gone too far. I personally feel like what is on that map now is a good starting point for zoning. And I think that what I would do as when I'm on council, hopefully, is to just be thoughtful as we go through these, particularly these zones between one type of zoning and another. I think those borderline places are what are going to require a lot of wisdom and thoughtfulness. So there are no simple answers to this. This is a hard question. No matter what you do, someone's going to feel like they're not being taken care of. And my goal is to be as thoughtful as possible, to listen to every person that's at the table, to try to be fair and equitable in the decisions on zoning ordinances.
Gotcha. Mr. Wade. So the same question, just to touch some of the same points, make sure we get the same idea.
Yes.
So what's your support for the current vision of the future land use map? And how do we weigh some of the different competing interests between existing property owners and those who think that the place should be denser to allow more people to live here? All those different things.
Yes, thank you. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share my vision for Charlottesville. This is an area that I feel that I particularly have a voice in because I have a master's degree in urban environmental planning. I did planning for Albemarle County for 20 years. I've seen the terminology, the colors and things like that. But I understand that this is a very critical issue. The future land use map is trying to accomplish a lot, address affordable housing, some past discrimination with the redlining and things like that. But I've also heard over the last 18 months from individuals from all spectrums, from those who are advocating for affordable housing and those who have those established homes and maybe don't like the color that's been put on their block. And one thing that I've noticed that I feel that I've seen is that they all want to address affordable housing. They all love the city of Charlottesville. And with that as a common denominator, I really believe that that is something that we can use to move this issue forward. With that, we can say, okay, well, let's which I believe is happening now, is that we're starting to compromise. We're starting to come together. We're starting to come in. And I think Brian mentioned it, that I think that once we start getting people upset with us from both sides, you know what, we might be heading in the right direction. And so I think that we have to listen to everyone. I think the city council and planning commission, they have, because they're trying to address the different comments that they have, but also understanding who those voices are, and trying to address everyone's, that even those that they may not hear from, but they know that it's an issue. And so what I would do if elected to city council is, right now, the current city council, they are planning to adopt the map. And if they do, then we will have the hard work, which is the zoning ordinance. And I've helped to rewrite many zoning ordinance as a planner. I understand how to do that, but I also understand that that is the meat and bones. That is going to put the legal aspects to those colors and those zoning maps and things that we have. And so I'll be ready to do that from day one.
Thank you. And I believe Mr. Williamson will ask the second question.
Oh, well, the second question goes first to Mr. Pinkston. And it's somewhat related to the first question with regard to the future vision of Charlottesville. Is the city of Charlottesville capable of building the infrastructure to cope with the greater density called for in the adopted affordable housing plan and the draft future land use map? And will it require increased investment? If so, where will that investment come from?
Right, another really good question. Yeah, so the simple answer is yes, to do the sort of density that's being proposed, the kind of infill work that is being suggested, moving from strictly R1 zoning to having the option for triplexes and quadplexes and so forth. Any sort of proposed change will need to go through the rudiments of a code review with the city, and thinking in terms of storm sewers and water supply and road structures and things like that. And so I guess the simple answer is yes, to do these things that are being proposed, we will have to ensure that the infrastructure is there. The question is, how do we do that in a thoughtful way? We just saw with what's happening on Stribling Avenue, we have a really promising development that's hopefully not completely put on hold, but paused because of a situation with the sidewalks. It's clearly the case that on Stribling Avenue, they need sidewalks to be able to do this. And I think the developer has been thoughtful about trying to, provide some, to try to meet in the middle in terms of the fact that, the city hasn't invested in sidewalks in that location. So all of these things sort of force you to step back and say, well, what could we have done differently in the past so that we weren't in this situation now? It's sort of low-hanging fruit to criticize NDS. It's sort of low-hanging fruit to criticize the CIP process. But I think that all of those can be improved. I'm glad we've got some new direction in those groups. And so the long story short is, yes, we will have to make those investments in infrastructure. I will tell you this, that if I'm reviewing any zoning ordinance, my background is in engineering and project management, I'm going to want to know that what's being proposed, the city can, in terms of the physical infrastructure, can support it. So that's one thing. One of the things that I've heard many times talking with people about the FLUM, the future land use map, first of all, people look at it and like, oh my goodness, they're going to build a 7-Eleven here on Meadowbrook Heights. Well, that's not necessarily the idea. The idea is to provide sort of an envelope for future development. But the other piece with any of these things is that before, not only does the economics have to be right for a developer to be able to afford to do a proposed development, but the infrastructure would have to be there too. I mean, I certainly would not ever go along with something, and my guess is that the codes would not allow it either. So the short answer is, I think, yes. We would have to fund that. We would need to write into the zoning ordinances. We need to make sure NDS is funding that. So.
All right. Same question to Mr. Wade. And I'd like to expand the infrastructure question to include, based on your background with the school board, schools. And the infrastructure for schools that would go along with increased residential that's being contemplated in the adopted affordable housing plan and the draft future land use map.
Thank you. Yes, I think that that's something it's critical because to me, it's addressing quality of life. And if you live in a neighborhood or in a community and that quality of life is not there, then you're going to move or you're not going to be happy. And that's something that's the goal. That's the purpose of us being here, for people to have that quality of life to live in the city. So I know that's something we can't measure, but man, I sure would like to put that in zoning ordinance somehow. What's the quality of life measure? How can we measure that if we approve this, unit for 42 units or 50 or whatever it is? What is that going to do for the sidewalks, the street, for that intersection? How long is it going to take you to get out without a traffic signal? We definitely want to address that, and I will not approve any development if that's not adequately addressed and not with future development has to be done as part of that. And as far as the schools, we have capacity. We will have capacity to, over the 16 years I've been on the school board, the population has gone up and down. But I think that we have the capacity to deal with this. I think it will be a good thing if we are in a position, well, you know what, we need a new school. We haven't built one in over 50 years. Charlottesville High School was the last high school built in 1974. It will be a marvelous thing to be in a position that we come to us as city councilors, the school board, and say, with the new superintendent coming in, Dr. Girl, and say, you know what, we need to build a new school because we have too many students. Wonderful thing to happen. And so it's just something that has to be addressed, because if your residents are not happy, no matter if they're renting or buying or owning, if they're not happy with where they live, they're going to move. And the new person is coming in, they're not going to be willing to pay as much. That's something we have to get right. It's our duty. It's our obligation.
Thank you. Ms. Washington, the question 2 to you: is the city capable of building the infrastructure? And what would you consider important infrastructure to be assembled concurrently with the residences contemplated in the affordable housing plan and future land use map?
Okay, so yeah, we're talking about infrastructure. Infrastructure is something that's come up because, well, not only is it about that time, but we've also seen an increase in our population. We're now at 50,000 residents. And with that being said, it's definitely caused us to prioritize development, whether that's residential, commercial, or mixed. And also as well, we need to think about how our traffic is definitely congested in populated areas. So, which is definitely causing us to get the ball rolling with our sidewalks. Also as well, in certain areas, making sure that we're remaining in compliance or at least corresponding with our risk reduction program as extension to the fire station, making sure that we're adding in those left-hand turning lanes so that we're able to avoid not only congestion, but as a way to tackle our emissions as well. All of that's very important. As we work to build the city up, we want to make sure that it's still accommodating the needs of our residents. And then aside from that, you had mentioned our affordable housing. And as we continue to add to our housing supply, I definitely think it's important to make sure that we continue to have things like parking. So all of these are the infrastructure is typically the things that are overlooked, I'd say, especially in a period of development. Now you asked about how exactly do we go about making sure that we can see these through. And I definitely think it's with things like properly allocating funding from the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which is a stimulus package that we'll be receiving within the next couple of months, if not already, I'm assuming. Also as well, making sure that we're properly, spending the funding from our improvement plan. That both of those are very important, and they'll definitely work to make sure that we're able to not only build the city up, but we're able to grab a hold of the projects that have been postponed Whether that's reconfiguring the schools, as you had asked Juan here, it's definitely important to make sure that we're not only reconfiguring the school, but that we're also changing the construct of it so that it can be a model of what our buildings should look like moving forward. And definitely considering things like solar panels as we make Charlottesville more sustainable, which also works to address the agenda of climate action.
Very good, thank you. I believe Mr. Tubbs has question number 3.
Question number 3 goes first to Mr. Wade. City Council has been told recently, a couple of weeks ago, that the equivalent of a, that's a technicality, but an important one, the equivalent of a 15-cent increase on the tax rate, property tax rate, is required to cover the costs of the $75 million reconfiguration of the schools, as well as a lot of the other items that are in the capital improvement program, such as the $10 million a year for affordable housing. They've also been told that the city is very close to capacity in terms of its ability to raise the debt for those future improvements, for anything above that. But if the city approves a 15-cent, let's just say the property assessments are flat, and the city and council approves a 15-cent tax rate. According to the figures provided to me here, they will jump from 26 out of 39 independent cities in Virginia to 18. Do you know how you're going to vote in March if you're elected when it comes to that tax rate, given those conditions are there, even if it's an equivalent? And if elected, you will be one of those 5 votes for 4 budgets. So you're going to be there for a lot of it.
Yeah, y'all are good. Y'all throwing about 10 to 15 questions in there.
You're going to get 100 when you're up there if you're elected.
Yeah,
So.
yes. So I definitely would support the increase. And so that would be spaced out over several years, and hopefully during that time we would get some support from the state for some legislation for construction funds for schools. We need it. We need it. We haven't done the investment in the schools that we should have. And as you noted, that all of that is not just for the schools, it's for these other infrastructure improvements that we noted. It's vital that we do this. I think that if you ask the citizens, do you want, for the most part, do you want a tax increase to support and improve the schools? I think that most of them would say yes, because they go into the schools, we take care of the schools, but they're old, they need to be updated. And so it takes money to do that. One thing that I would do if on council is that we need to start putting away funds for those type of major improvements. We put aside money to do roof improvement and painting and things like that, but not for the big improvements. And so other localities with much less wealth have built new schools. We haven't done that in Charlottesville. It's difficult now because we haven't been squirreling away funds for these type of big improvements, and we need to do that, and it's vital. So I would support it. I don't think that we would do it all in 1 year. We really need to educate the public that said this 15 cent or this 10 cent, whatever it is over this period, that is going to schools. It's going to improvements or whatever the project is, so the projects are, so that the public would know where their money is going, so they can see it. And these are things that they will see as they're going to work, as they go into the store, the new improved schools, the sidewalks, those type of improvements. Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Washington, the question, I will rephrase it basically just to reset it a little bit there. So as of this moment, the 15-cent tax rate increase, or an equivalent based on whatever the assessments are for 2022, is required for the existing capital improvement, as well as the $75 million school reconfiguration. Well, that's just the Beaufort part. If you're elected, you would be making that vote, as well as votes in 3 other budgets. Can you talk a little bit about your support for this upcoming one, at the very least, and then what the ramifications of that might be?
Yeah, so we're talking about a possible tax hike, which has been in consideration. It's one of those things that kind of fluctuates, but definitely I would like to do everything possible to avoid that. When we're talking about our schools, not just reconfiguring them, but we want to talk about actually changing our contingency learning plan. And a big part of that for me is making sure that we're able to implement universal pre-K programs. That being said, we're currently waiting for the General Assembly to adjourn so that they're able to make their vote and their decision on a 1-cent tax referendum, which will actually work to generate about 10 billion across the region. And I think that's absolutely amazing because it'll work to cover those bureaucratic costs. And definitely lessening the burden on our struggling families, but not only our struggling families, our low income ones, working families, and everything in between. When you start to run up against a wall with waiting lists, having to actually meet criteria, whether that's being employed by UVA, City of Charlottesville, or anything of that nature. So I definitely would like to do that. Aside from that, when we're talking about development and we're talking about land use, and there's an increase in the cost per acre, that definitely could study along a conversation of a tax hike as well. I definitely think it's something that could happen in the next 5 years, but I don't think it's something that we need to aggressively address at this moment. I think there's other things that we can do. Also, aside from that, we're talking about austerity as we look to build up our economy due to the shortfalls of COVID. That being said, I definitely think that the sharing revenue agreement with Albemarle County, we've received that compensation. And it's about a 2.74% increase, which is a projected $400,000, which actually helps to bridge the gap for any losses that we've seen in regards to meals or lodging taxes. So that's pretty much my answer on that. So as I hopefully walk into my position on city council, I definitely would like to be able to say no to a tax hike.
Mr. Pinkston, I will rephrase the question, but I think we get the gist of it by now.
I think I've got it.
But I want to throw one extra thing in there, which of course, this is a Survivor rules here. But I don't know what that means. I've never watched it. Actually, I'm taping it now. Let's be clear that 15-cent tax increase is one of the ideas that's thrown out there is this idea of a 1-cent sales tax. But of course, that has to go through a legislature. The legislature could change. In other words, that could be a variable that city council might not be able to even have on the table.
Yes.
But there's things moving forward for all of these various items. If you're presented with a 15-cent tax increase with the equivalent, how are you going to vote? And then answer the other stuff too.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty stark way you're framing it there, Sean, which is fine. I'll step back just a second.
Please do.
And yeah, the first thing is, watching some of the slides that were presented a couple of weeks ago in the meeting with the schools. I'll have to say that a number of the slides that were put up, I didn't quite follow. And that's no judgment on anybody else, I guess perhaps myself. But the first thing that I would want to do is really understand what is at stake. What's involved. I was surprised with some of the things I heard, for instance, that the parking deck was not taken off the table yet, or some of the other things in the CIP that had been. West Main was brought up, and some of the other things weren't. And I'm not picking on particular projects. I'm simply trying to say that I would like to myself kind of go behind the scenes and say, okay, what are your assumptions? And why is it that you really think this is the case? I'm not personally convinced it would be 15 cents. I don't know that. And I'm also hoping that we do have assessments rise such that we don't need that equivalent. So I'm not going to just, sort of baldly state 15 cents. What I will say is that this community has been for over a decade asking for the school reconfiguration. What I will say is that we've got sidewalks on Stribling and other places that need to be taken care of. We've got real issues in the city that require funding. I am interested in benchmarking our taxation to other places. What I will say is kind of like with the land use map, I think it's important to make the case to citizens, to residents, make the case for not only why increasing density is valuable, but in this case, why we need more revenue. And I do think, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to get this 1 cent sales tax increase. That would take a huge amount of pressure off. But I don't think anyone should be kidding ourselves that we're heading into a difficult fiscal climate. We've got the schools program is expensive, but it's important. It needs to be done. And so what I'm going to say is I'm going to, go behind the folks in the budget office, make sure I understand their numbers and assumptions. I'd like to know, for instance, with these contracts, are they asking for the full 75 million up front? Is there going to be a draw schedule on that? What can we do to minimize our borrowing costs, things like that? So.
Thank you. I have question 4, and question 4 goes first to Ms. Washington. How do you define equity? In November 2018, a previous city council allocated $500,000 from the city's equity fund to a development firm to create a small area plan for the Star Hill community. The project was converted to a vision plan, and a timeline for implementation is not complete. How do you guard against the word equity being used to justify projects that end up falling short of their expectations?
Yeah, so equity is when we're working to bridge the gap for our disadvantaged individuals, or specifically our residents here in Charlottesville. So anytime that we're able to make something more accessible, whether that's housing or, whether that's resources that help them become more self-sufficient. We have, for example, Habitat for Humanity in regards to home ownership. We have IDAs, which help them to save money and use their accounts to be able to start small businesses, or also work as a down payment for their home as well. I definitely think things like this are very important as we continue to lift up our lower quartile neighbors. But aside from that, to answer your question about Star Hill, I definitely think that that's something that's not quite equity, it's more so development. We want to make sure that these terms these terms that we hold near and dear aren't being displaced. I definitely want to make sure that we're continuing to develop in a way that connects our city, in a way that builds our city up, but I don't want to see it, I don't want to see projects fall by the wayside that we didn't necessarily need to begin with. So that being said, when we're talking about the need for housing supply, whether that's a new apartment complex, we definitely want to make sure that we're prioritizing funding towards that, as opposed to, hiring a firm and that being where the funding has been allocated to. So yeah.
Very good. Mr. Pinkston, how do you define equity, and your thoughts on the Star Hill vision plan?
Yeah, so for me, equity is the distinction between equity and equality is if a person who's disabled goes up to a door, it may be equal between both of us that the door is as it is, but ADA requirements bring it in a level of equity in that it compensates for situations that the person can't help. Equity in the context of Charlottesville has all kinds of other ramifications, particularly the fact that our community is still struggling with a legacy of racism. You can look at the Orange Dot 4.0 report and all of these things. It's just a fact that where our community is, there's a significant subset that needs the current generation to look back in history and do what we can to help lift people up. So now it's true that people can use equity as a buzzword, just like they can use diversity, just like conservatives can use the word freedom, to explain or excuse or do whatever for their pet idea. I think the specific thing that you mentioned is not a bad idea. Star Hill, and any particular thing that is sort of put forward as a project to, in this case, improve equity, should have clear deliverables. It should have a clear rate of return. Those things should be clear. And perhaps in this case is not. I don't know, I haven't followed that development, but I do think that particular notion of redeveloping Star Hill is a good one. And if we've got a fund like the equity fund that can be used to sort of jumpstart projects like that, I'm all for it. Again, any sort of project that is initiated needs clear success criteria, and people need to be held accountable for results. So there's a larger philosophical question here and a more narrow question about that particular project. I do think, particularly for folks who look like me and have my history and background, I need to really always be thinking about how others who come to the table from different perspectives, are they feeling like they're welcome? Are they feeling like they have a place at the table? And it's something I have to continually kind of error correct and make sure that I'm being thoughtful, which is why it's good to have folks from different perspectives. So that's a convoluted, long answer, but hopefully my intent is clear.
Thank you. Mr. Wade, how would you define equity? And what are your thoughts with the use of $500,000 from the city's equity fund for the Star Hill community visioning?
Thank you. So equity, that's one, as I said before, is that, I've looked that word up over the past year or so because it's been used so much. I've seen it being a page long. I've seen it being a paragraph long. And for me, equity is doing what you got to do to make things equal. And that could be different things for different people, different situations. But for me, that's what it boils down to. And I know it could be a more fancy smancy definition of it, but that's the way Juan can put his mind around it. And what does that look like? For me, that when at particular actions that I've done, well, sometimes you have a blind spot, and we didn't realize it until we got it on the front page of New York Times, as far as the schools. And we're like, what can we do about this? And my colleagues and I on the school board, we did one of those self-evaluations. We had a lot of public input, and we took concrete actions, to kind of even things up, to equalize things, whether it's providing more resources, because we know our students come into schools at different levels. And we just found out that, and then sometimes it takes us 12, 13 years for them to equalize. And we found out that today, when the graduation rates came out, that, Charlottesville, we're above the state average with 96, 97%. That's for all students and our students of color. And so we're doing it. We're doing the things that we have to do to catch up. And what does that mean if on city council, if those type of proposals would come up for, let's say, Star Hill and others neighborhoods? We will work with developments like New Hill Development and other contractors and consultants. And it just, it's difficult because it's controversial and you're making changes, just like the future land use map, but you have goals. You put measurable goals in. It's like by this month, you need to, have this approved and that. And so we want to make things happen. I don't want to see a lot of studies done, and I'm glad they started on the Belmont Bridge, because if they said we want to do another study on the Belmont Bridge, I'm not sure what I would have done. So glad they finally start. We have enough studies in this city that we can start doing and stop studying.
Thank you. Mr. Tubbs.
The next question goes to Mr. Pinkston first. How would you define success in the city's role in encouraging economic development? Is the city well equipped to realize all of its potential? And going back to that tax question, which this is not the tax question, but would that impact economic vitality if there is lots of increases?
Yeah, so I 2.5 years ago, one of the first groups of people I engaged with were business owners, because I felt, particularly after, let me just step back a second. Commerce is very important to me. So business, economic development, whatever term you want to use, commerce is important. I've spent my career, my first job was with Procter & Gamble. I've worked in jobs in which it's essentially a business. But it's not only the fact that, if we increase economic vitality, if we increase our tax base, all kinds of good things can happen. We can grow the the tax base to fund these equity programs that we want to fund. It's that commerce is part of what it takes for a city to work. It gives us all jobs. It's part of the beating heart of a great city. And one of the things that I really want to see happen if I'm on council is some of the latent antagonism or hostility or whatever that goes on between folks who are deeply concerned about equity and folks who want to see economic vitality and got these entrepreneurs and these new businesses and ideas and buildings. I really think that we need to be able to square the circle on some of this and move past what seems to me like a low-level hostility between these groups. Going back to the question of equity and going back to the Orange Dot report and then to the work of Rich Schuyler and folks like that with PVCC's Network to Work, it's very clear that the solutions to our problems with the need for building wealth are going to come from the employers, the business owners in this community. And so not only is it just philosophically to be important that we have a thriving commercial sector because of all the ideas and the people in the mix. You think about the cities that great cities with great commercial hubs and the culture that flowed out of them. But not only that, it's the fact that we need those businesses to not only generate tax revenue to fund equity programs, for instance, but we also need them to help raise those amongst us who really need these sorts of opportunities.
Thank you. And Mr. Wade, the question back to you, is that correct? Yes, it goes that way, right? Sorry, I didn't. How would you correct Sean Tubbs from not asking the right question? No, seriously, the question is, how would you define success in the city's role in encouraging economic development? Is the city well equipped to realize its potential? And of course, the tax rate. And if the city is looking at increases, what's the role in that? And how could that affect economic vitality?
Yeah, so the city, I think that there's so much untapped potential in economic development and businesses in Charlottesville. And I think that it has been not seem like it's a tug of war that if you give money to businesses or to associations to promote businesses and not to affordable housing, that you're giving one and taking away from the other. I just totally disagree with that, because I think that if you support the businesses, that you will have resources to give money to affordable houses, to programs like Network to Work, that we can move the city forward. It's a couple of things that I would do, to promote economic development if I'm elected. One is that I would just create a really massive marketing plan to promote the business sectors in the city, whether it's the corner, the downtown mall, in the new emerging areas, the old Kmart site. Just said these are the areas that we have, and come and visit them. Another thing that I would do is to empower the tourism board that we have, which is, right now, you go to different places and you see, a van. I just don't think that is an effective way to have, to promote your business. I just think you want to have a place. We have this great place on the downtown mall. What they're saying that they need, they need restrooms, they need, constant oversight of the mall as far as, picking up trash and things. That's another thing that I would do, is that, we have a lot of youth that's on the mall that we can maybe make them youth ambassadors. Many of them live close by in Friendship Court and in other neighborhoods. Give them some empowerment, some ownership of it, and pay them, a salary. I think that this is something that I think that we can easily do. I would also like to see us do a better job in promoting these sectors, business sectors during the holiday season. I've seen, so many other communities that they do so much more during those holiday seasons to make it a more inviting place. I think I would love to see a little temporary ice rink in the downtown mall. We see it in Williamsburg, and I've been in Reston, and I won't do it, but I know others will. You know, things like that that we can do, that we, you know, if we support the businesses, people will come there to spend, not only locally, but from other areas, to come here, stay in the hotel, spend more tax revenues, more money in the coffers, more money that we can give to affordable housing, these other programs. That is what we need to promote and let the public know, and not that, okay, we're giving maybe money to this organization and not to that. We're not competing against one another. We have to move forward together as a city.
Thank you. And that was right at 3 minutes.
It was.
Just thought I'd point that out.
Very-
I was about to roll it, I'm sorry.
Very
No,
impressive.
I was gonna have to, but Ms. Washington, you get an extra 5 seconds for that there. How would you define success in the city's role in encouraging economic development? And is the city well-equipped to realize its potential? And of course, the taxes. Is there a link between excess taxation and a decrease in economic vitality?
Well, first and foremost, I definitely want to see Charlottesville thrive, and that is a major reason for why I'm running. Definitely, the budget has been a very big conversation over the course of the pandemic as we work to make sure that we can avoid a recession. So as we work to take those measures, again, I talk about austerity, and that's definitely the reforms that we need to make in regards to our economic political systems here, working to make sure that we're able to avoid a decline in our economy, making sure that we're able to push forward on our operating budget, which currently is $192 million, to be able to address the growth in our population. We've definitely seen conversations about that rising in the next year or so. Aside from that, I definitely want to make sure that we're working to stimulate activity in regards to historic downtown, making sure that we're able to fill the vacancies down there, and definitely, when we're talking about connecting the city, we're talking about expanding public transit. We want to make more routes. And I definitely think that that's important as we work to continue to make equitable solutions for our low wealth neighbors, or not just low wealth, but people are actually using public transportation as a main option as they look away from, we want to minimize our carbon output. We want to make a smaller footprint here, and we want to do that by being more sustainable and using different methods, whether that's walking or whether that's catching cat. So with that being said, things like that works to, bring our community together, and it works to make, things like working or, your everyday list of to-dos, making sure that you're able to knock those off regardless of if you drive or not. Also as well, it definitely opens up conversations about, connecting the city. And we've talked about UVA, making sure we're able to, strengthen our relationship with the university. And that also means making sure that we're able to, stimulate our activity and our traffic flow from UVA to downtown. And I think that we're able to do that by continuing to support our business owners. Recently there was the restaurant loan for our existing restaurants. We have a lot of mom and pops. So making sure that they don't go under due to financial hardship would definitely be amazing as well. We have a couple of really great things here aside from breweries, and our restaurants is definitely one of them.
Thank you. I also want to thank, I will say that any community would be blessed to have the three of you well-spoken, concise speakers. For the first time in my memory, I have time to ask an extra question during the question period because you are efficient and effective with your answers. I can only hope this will continue when you achieve council. So our sixth question will go first to Mr. Wade. The current city manager has set up a new administration with 2 deputy city managers. They come in at a time when the city has recently made new hires. including a planning director, while retaining/demoting the previous planning director. Should the council have the ability to veto or approve a personnel decision made by the city manager? And where is the cutoff line?
So that's a great question. And I would have to say that, I understand my lane as a 16-year member of the Charlottesville School Board. For most of that of the last 3 or 4 months, that Rosa Atkins, Dr. Atkins was essentially our city manager. And as a school board member, we had 3 functions: hire the superintendent, approve policy, and approve the budget. I understand in Charlottesville, it's local politics that people come to us for different things, but that is our main goal. And in city council, hire city manager, approve budget, approve policy. But we know that it's so much more involved. But I think that we were able to move the city schools forward by letting Dr. Atkins do her job that we hired her to do. Many times we weren't happy. I wasn't happy maybe with some of the decisions that she made, but she's the expert on that. And so that is a position that I would take. I haven't really thought about like, okay, well, for this position, that position, maybe we should have some buy-in. I think that can get pretty dicey. I think at this point, I would stick with the position. We hired the city manager. We let him or her do their job. And if we don't like it, then we have the opportunity to certainly comment, but evaluate them if we're not happy with it. So that would be my position.
Very good. Ms. Washington, with the new city manager coming in, new hires, et cetera, should council have the ability to veto or approve personnel decisions made by the city manager? Where would the cutoff line be?
Yeah, so when we're talking about our government and making sure that we're able to provide for Charlottesville and we're able to do that in totality, we need to make sure that the infrastructure of City Hall is definitely intact and that we have either our chiefs, whether we're talking about the chief of police or whether we're talking about executive directors or departmental heads. We want to make sure that we have all of our all of our departments fully intact so that we're able to function. And I also think that it's really important when we're talking about our city manager and the overall affairs, hiring these individuals is a part of their duties, aside from things like a project procurement, or overall management, definitely, a budget oversight, and definitely making sure that city council is functioning to the best of their ability. Now, one that I think is important so that we're able to lessen the strain on the city manager is making sure that all counselors are focusing on core parts of the city, whether that's development, affordability, inclusion, sustainability. I definitely think that all of these are very important. And it seems as though sometimes we stall out and things fall by the wayside. And I think that that's because, people aren't actively handling the agendas simply because maybe there's not enough focus there. And also when we're talking about hiring and firing, we want to make sure that people, their backgrounds I definitely are in sync with the job that they're being hired to do. And we want to make sure that we're hiring individuals for longevity. Definitely to get back to chief of police, it seems to be a really big turnover. And we want to make sure that we're keeping our crime rate low, but we also want to make sure that we have someone there that understands that, we want to keep our community safe. They understand that, there's reforms to be made within our, within the infrastructure of our police department so that we're able to prevent misconduct and brutality from taking place. But we also want to make sure that we have someone that can work hand in hand with the Police Civilian Review Board moving forward, because if we're not able to have that healthy relationship there, it kind of just causes tension. And I think that that's something that we should definitely avoid when it's a supervisory board. And, we want to make sure that they're able to do things like, scheduling trainings. or, doing the performance feedbacks. And I definitely think that those are two main things that a PCRB should definitely be in charge of. And I think that once we're able to kind of make sure that all of these new parts, whether it's new programs or new organizations, are fully functional, we're able to kind of like relieve the tension of hiring and firing. And it's just like everybody's there and they're doing their job and they're doing it right. And we're able to have a healthy city hall altogether.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Pinkston, same question to you with regard to the current city manager, new administration, and hiring and firing. Should council be consulted on personnel decisions made by the city manager? Where is the cutoff line?
Yes, I largely concur with what Juandiego said in terms of his approach to this. I think, in fact, I'm confident that it's written into the city's charter that the role of city council is to provide oversight of the city manager, and that those decisions belong to him or to her. That said, I think that in any kind of organization, a lot depends on levels of trust that have been built. There's a lot to be said for, the term is emotional intelligence, whatever term you want to use, where you're able to build an organization where there's enough communication between people so that before you get to a crisis point, people feel like that they've been heard at some level. So I guess my point is that I think any organization, particularly one between the city council and the city manager, having a level of communication, having a level of baseline understanding, because obviously the city manager wants to maintain their job too. And so building the kind of relationships there on both sides between the city manager and city councilors and vice versa, I just think that that's really important. And it's based on clear communication. It's based on holding people accountable. It's based on all of those sorts of things. But it's also based on personal relationships where you try to understand where the other person is coming from, where they realize your values and comprehend what's important to you, so that hopefully before you get to a point of a termination or whatever, there have been plenty of chances for conversations to have happened before that. So yeah, so in general, I mean, I think Juan is exactly right. My only caveat to that is I think that clearly there's room for improvement in terms of overall communication between the city manager and city council, it would seem to be.
Thank you. I'd like to say we're about to shift gears. As I promised, the last third of this would be a different kind of forum. What many folks don't know is that these candidates spend a lot of time together. They've heard a lot of the same questions and they've heard a lot of their same answers. So we thought, let's let the candidates do our homework. And so we're going to have first Brian Pinkston ask a question of the other two candidates, and Juandiego Wade will be the first to respond. So Mr. Pinkston, what question would you pose to your two competing candidates?
Yeah, so my question would be something like this. You both have lived in the city and been active in the city for many years and have made contributions in certain spheres. I would be just interested in how your background, the work you've done civically, the people you know in the community, how that would inform your governance.
Thank you. So I feel like I kind of cut my teeth here in Charlottesville in volunteering in civic engagement and had no aspiration of getting into politics, but I love serving this community. I'm a humble public servant, as I say, and so I have this wristband on, and people will see this for the last 4 years. I haven't taken it off. I've been volunteering in this community for the last probably 30 years, but 4 or 5 years ago, my church, we went to a mission trip in Ethiopia and stayed there a couple of weeks. It was a small village, a lot of work to be done. And the ladies of the community gave me this, and it hasn't left my wrist since then. But what it does, it reminds me that no matter who you are and where you are, you have the ability to give back. And I'm thinking about that over the years that the youth that I mentor, many of them come from low wealth families, and I take them to mission trips, and they realize that, you know what, geez, I may not have a lot materially, but I still can give back to this family. I can help build this house. I can help build the bathroom on. And so that's one of the things that really keeps me humble. And so if my wife is not around to remind me of that, I can just look down at my wrist now. And I think that's going to be even more important should I make counsel to help me keep grounded, kind of how I got started in this community. What made me fall in love with this community is the people, and hopefully in the people that I will be serving. So that is that is kind of why I am here now, because over the last 18 months, I have people to say, Juan, are you crazy? Why do you want to do this? So Juan, thank you for doing this, because no one else would do it, and so we're not doing this for money. We're not doing it for fame. We're doing it because we love this city and we want to try to make a difference. And for me, one of the reasons that it really prompted me to do it is because of my service to the community over the last 30 years and the people that have stepped up to the plate.
Ms. Washington, Mr. Pinkston's question to you.
Yeah, so definitely, my first job after graduating from Albemarle High School was working as a leasing consultant at Park Ridge Apartments, which at the time was owned by Albemarle Housing Improvement Program. So that definitely helped me gain more of an insight into affordability and what that looks like, and making sure that we're able to get individuals rapidly rehoused. And I definitely think that it's important, as since then Piedmont Housing Alliance has purchased that, and I definitely want to make sure that we're continuing not only to offer our low to moderate income individuals and families housing supply and options that work for them, but I want to make sure that we're able to tackle the war on poverty. And I think that as we're continuing to build Charlottesville up, we're seeing a rise in the cost of living. But I want to make sure that we can get our rate of homelessness down below 1%. And I definitely think that that's something that we can do. There's TJAC, and I think that that's really important. Seeing individuals struggling, and they don't really know where they're going to be sleeping at that night. They don't really know what their options are going to be after Patcham closes. That definitely pulls at me, and I definitely think that it's something that we can work to tackle. I don't see why we can't, and they've recently purchased the motel on 29 North. Major initiative, and I would love to continue to see projects like that take place. But also to making sure that we're not just renovating this area for them to live in, but making sure that we're tackling some of those issues of why they're homeless to begin with. Whether that means whether they can't find a job, or whether they are battling addiction or mental challenges, making sure that we're able to continue to invest into social work. I definitely think that's important. And going beyond working with families, I definitely had some time working with at-risk youth, our inner city kids, and making sure that they're able to use diversion options, as we want to make sure that we can avoid imprisonment. We don't want, even though, after 18, it tends to fall off, we want to make sure that we're able to kind of help stop these type of cyclical things from taking place. And, making sure that we're able to lift up our low wealth neighbors. We want to make sure that we don't just stop because we see that there's that zero income bracket, and you're kind of like, how exactly did that happen? And people kind of continue to just step over it. But I want to make sure that we're thinking about everything in this full circle, and we're able to build people up, and working with our community is really important to me. And not only working with the community, but definitely making sure that we're able to make reforms. And I think that the way that I can be most beneficial to my city is running for city council, where I'm able to actually make change through public policy. And that's definitely something that geared me to want to run, because I think that oftentimes we do have these models that have worked in the past, but we still have issues that we're facing, and we're still having to provide solutions for them. And with that being said, I definitely want to use my youth as a way to be able to provide a fresh pair of eyes, and being able to be like, well, look, this worked and we've been using this for the past 10 years, but what can we use now moving forward so that we can definitely no longer have this be an issue in our community? And so, I want to definitely talk about the 3 things that I want to focus on. And, development is big, we're a growing city, but affordability and sustainability are two other things that I definitely want to make sure that I tackle, hopefully within the next 4 years.
Well, thank you. So our next question is for Mr. Wade to ask the same thing, a question of each of your fellow candidates here. It can be anything, but preferably on public policy
Oh.
or anything.
Oh,
just,
yeah. So I was kind of going a different direction. I wasn't sure what.
Or it can be anything. I just don't talk about Survivor.
Right.
That's all.
So what is this with you and Survivor?
It's on right now and I'm missing it.
I'm sorry.
Joking.
So I love this. Charlottesville is 10 square miles and I love this city. One of the things I do is that I walk different parts of the city. And so I would like to ask Yas and Brian, what is their favorite spot in the city and why?
Oh, Brian, he's got the mic.
It's yeah, I guess it would be. Sorry, there was a yes.
My favorite spot in the city and why? I guess the place that first comes to mind is under renovation now, which is Alderman Library. But it's not in the city technically. I guess it's in the county. So, but I love Alderman Library. Being there in the stacks with the books. In Charlottesville proper, I would say probably Venable Elementary, because my church used to meet there during before COVID. Hopefully some point we'll go back there. But just that corner there with people coming and going and little kids coming into church, and then school days is a special place to me. So yeah.
Yes.
Your favorite spot?
Yeah, definitely. So my favorite spot or just area in general is definitely historic downtown. I love downtown. I love being able to walk, and it's somewhere where I frequent. I love Mudhouse Coffee. I definitely love being able to drink coffee, especially that's from, our local area. And then aside from that, definitely being able to, again, I'm a foodie. So I love being able to, just walk along the mall and catch a bite to eat from somewhere that I haven't had yet. I've kind of strayed off and I've started going to Iron Poffles. And so it's a little different. It's kind of like a vegan waffle, I guess. But that's a nice area for me. I like it a lot. They actually have a bookshop too. And I want to say that the name of it's it might be Blue Whales or something like a little odd, but the books are usually, you can get it for got $10. You can probably find a book there. So it's pretty neat. Yeah.
I think waffles over Alderman Library.
I'm going to have to check those waffles out. Ms. Washington, it is now your turn to pose the question to your fellow candidates that you wish to have answered regarding their candidacy or policy or waffle choice.
Great. So let's see. Well, so on my website, I've introduced a firearm policy. As over the course of this year, we've had some isolated incidents involving gun violence, and even at a state level, they look to address it. And they, as of July 1, adopted a new law which is to make a 3 to 5 day extension for background checks that aren't cleared at the point of purchase. So with that being said, to piggyback off of that, are there any policies that you all have considered implementing once you're on council?
Mr. Pinkston.
Yeah, I've thought about this a good bit. You know, when you're trying to go to sleep and you're hearing, this is on weekends, it seems like every weekend you're hearing, sirens coming into the city, and it's disconcerting to say the least. And for those in some of the most impacted communities, it's got to be deeply frightening. What do we do about that? On the one hand, I feel like I need to be careful what I say because I'm a white man who doesn't live in some of these areas, and I need to be careful that I don't sort of impose my ideas. The first thing I'd want to do is really understand what the residents in the affected areas, how they feel and what they think would make them safe. All of this ties into what's been going on with the police chief and with the police department, and having a credible voice there on the policing side. And I'd want to listen to what the nonprofit sector has to say, and people like the United Way or other folks who are in these areas, to look at what would be reasonable policy response. I've had some ideas like even cordoning some of these places off, these areas off on the weekends. That's not practical, I know, but it seems like a lot of this is coming from outside of the city in. So perhaps better detective work in terms of understanding the relationships that may bring about these random kinds of gunfire, and such that could be nipped in the bud or prevented from happening. I don't know. It's certainly complicated. I don't want to go in with a set of solutions ready-made, but I do think it's something that's moved in my mind from this is something that's worrisome a bit to like we really need to think hard as a community as to how we address this gun violence that's going on.
Thank you, Yas. That's an excellent question. I think that, I wouldn't, use a lot of energy as a council to try to like ban guns as a Second Amendment type of thing. I think it just would get kind of clogged down. I think that what I would do is that I would support organizations like the Buck Squad, like other community organizations that are out there doing the work that have those established relationships in the community, support those organizations, and that will prove to have a bigger impact on these type of things, and maybe employ some individuals who's out there in the community. They may not have the cleanest background, but they love the community and they want what's best for it, to maybe be someone that have those relationships and knows what's happening to prevent it. Something, my mom told me, dad told me years and years ago. I'm 55 years old, and they always told me that, my timetable to get in, well, not timetable, my curfew. My curfew was 11 o'clock. She said none good happened after 11 o'clock. And so that's what we finding now. There's some, things are happening out there, that's late at night. And so we need to just provide options and opportunities for these younger people to do, so that they won't be doing these type of things. And it's right. We do have, gang presence here in the city. And sometimes it is over, drugs or something like that. And we just provide options, and these things, you won't be able to eliminate it 100%. We want to, but I think that if we support programs like the Buck Squad and other programs like that, that's out there doing the thing, that I think that we will have an impact on it. So thank you again for the question.
And thank you to the candidates. Thank you to the three of you for your participation here tonight, and good luck. 3 seats, 3 counselors, three candidates for 2 seats. It's not written down, everybody. But thank you all for being here. And of course, thanks to the Hillsdale Conference Center for hosting this event tonight, and thanks to everybody there at home, and thanks to our audience. We didn't have an audience the last time around, but an important thing. No, I'm sorry. You can
They
ask
will be-
afterwards.
We'll be available after.
Yes. But just to close the program, though, if we could, early voting has started now. So if you're registered, and I believe the registration, someone here must know that. October, when's the last day for registering?
October 12th?
October 12th. I write everything down before I speak usually. But thanks to everybody for being out there. There are some other candidate forums coming up, I believe. If you, the candidates, might help share that information. Do you have that information?
We don't, there are neighborhood associations at this point, and they each give.
So send us a line and let us know. But thank you. I'm Sean Tubbs of Town Crier Productions. This is Neil Williamson of the Free Enterprise Forum. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to our candidates. And thank you for taking the time to
Be here in
to
person.
be here in person and to throw your hat in the ring. Democracy requires candidates to step forward and to be willing to go through this. So thank you very much.